As Psalm 19, verse 14, may the words of my mouth and the thoughts and meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. That's the bookend to what I'm going to say today. And you probably heard that said a lot, and you may not have known that it comes from the Bible. It's not just a thing that Anglicans like to say before they preach when they can't think of what to say in prayer. It's Psalm 19, verse 14. And we're gonna land there as well. It's always nice to know what the destination is, isn't it? So I'll tell you the destination is we're going to land with, may the words of my mouth and the thoughts and meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. And there's going to be a song, and we're going to sing it. You won't know it, so I'll sing the verses, and we'll join in the chorus. And that's where we're going to go at the end. So there's a chance for us at the end of the sermon to respond. We're going to respond. And will be a chance for prayer ministry too. So it might be there's something that strikes you as I speak, and you think, yeah, I need prayer for this. The strongest people in our church, the strongest character, the strongest people are the people that go up for prayer ministry. I say that because so often people think, I can't go to the front for prayer because people might think there's something wrong. If you don't go to the front for prayer, maybe there's something wrong. So that's my encouragement. I say that now, so when we get to it, you'll feel encouraged to go forward. I would go for prayer every week, but typically I'm playing a song, so I can't. That's just me. And so I say that as we begin because I'm going to spend some time today thinking about thinking. Thinking about thinking, because we're in this series. It's this time of the year when we get to be thankful. We have the Thanksgiving feast. Has anyone put on a few pounds of turkey in the last week? So we have this Thanksgiving feast, and we're thankful. And so last week we were thinking about what it means to be thankful people. The week before we were thinking about being generous as thankful people. The week before being generous with our treasure, and I preached on giving, and I'm glad to have got that out of the way, and it's been wonderful seeing some responses coming in, because I don't want to preach on giving for another 2 years, so I'm hoping that the responses come in, and then we can just leave it there. So thinking about generosity, we do often think, don't we, about money and giving away money. We often think, when we think of generosity, about being generous with our thanks. When other people have been generous to us, we want to thank them. And so that was last week. So this week, we're thinking about thinking. I believe that thinking is really important. But you don't really care what I think. You want to know what the Bible says. And so we heard today from Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus is talking about it's not what goes in that defiles, it's what comes out. The context is that he was speaking to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were really concerned about keeping the law. If you've seen Les Miserables, anyone seen Les Miserables? They were Javert. They were really into keeping the law. And Jesus is Valjean, and is bringing grace and saying, no, it's not about the law, it's about grace. And I'm not going to sing, just in case you're worried. I've done that before, where I've gone into Les Mis. I'm not going to do that today. But that's what it is, isn't it? We get the Pharisees who are there, and they're so het up on the law being followed, the law. And then Jesus comes and says, no, it's not about what you eat defiling you. It's about what you say and what you do, the stuff that comes out. Because what comes out is a reflection of what's inside. I'm going to read you a quote. And this is, see if you've heard this before. What's your thoughts? They become your words. What's your words? They become your actions. What's your actions? They become your habits. What's your habits? They become your character. What's your character? For it becomes your destiny. Has anyone heard that before? And does anyone know who said it? It's one of those that has been attributed to so many people. As I did a search, because I know that quote, and I knew that I wanted to use that today as I planned this series a while ago. But who said it? And it's really hard to find out. It was quoted, if you've seen the film Iron Lady, Anyone seen the film Iron Lady? It was quoted, Meryl Streep playing Margaret Thatcher said, "My father always used to say," and then quoted this. It seems that a guy called Frank Outlaw, anyone heard of him? I hadn't either. He was the president of Buy Low stores in the USA. He was the guy who is documented to have said this in this form. But actually, it goes back. This kind of thing has been said back until Victorian times, and there's evidence of kind of Sunday school teachers back in the 1850s, by which I don't mean 10 to 7, back in the 1850s, who were using words like this. Not in exactly the same way. So it's just one of these things that's around. But I think there's some truth in it. What's your thoughts, for they become your words. What's your words, they become actions. What's your actions, they become habits. What's your habits, they become character. What's your character, for it becomes your destiny. And so Jesus in Matthew's gospel is saying it's about what's in the heart. It's about what's in the heart. What's in our heart or what's in our mind that will impact the way we live our lives. And then we see Romans, and I want you to look with me at Romans 12, which is really the focus of today. And Romans 12, verse 2, and Paul's writing to the Romans, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So what Paul is saying, everything is about what's going on in our mind. If our mind is renewed and is transformed by God, then we will be able to test and approve what God's will is. Isn't that amazing? It's kind of mind-blowing, if I'm allowed to say that. It's mind-blowing. And so, a bit like the quote I just gave, it all comes back to what's going on in our mind. What are we thinking? What's making our heart beat? And that will impact the way we're going to live our lives and everything we're going to do. And so, if we want to be generous people, and here's the kind of the thesis of this, or the whatever you call it. If we want to live lives as generous people, that begins with what we're thinking. What do I mean by that? Well, have you ever gone to the grocery store and at the wrong time of day and been accosted by people selling apples or Girl Guide cookies? Has that happened to you? And do you feel slightly guilty and feel like you have to buy them? Even though the cookies have got palm oil that's been produced in bad rainforests and they're made by a company that's not very ethical, you're there torn, going, "Oh, shall I buy these or shall I not?" Or the apple, you're going, "Well, I'm going to go in and buy a bag of apples, and I don't particularly like that kind of apples that they're selling," but you feel you need to buy one. That is the opposite of being generous with our thoughts. Does that make sense? That is the opposite of being generous with our thoughts. Because when we're generous in our minds, we go out looking for things. We go out ready to be generous. We don't have to wait for somebody to say to us, "Will you give us some money, please, to help our brownie group or our guide group or our scout group," or whatever it is. We're just ready to give. And so being people who are generous in the whole of our lives begins with what's going on in our mind. And that is about our mind being transformed to be like God's. And this is kind of big, lofty stuff, isn't it? But I really think there's something here. And so I'm going to press in on this, and I'm hoping that for some people you'll go, "Oh yeah, this is helpful." And for others, you'll just think I'm barking mad, and that's fine. There are two saints called Saint Ignatius. There's Saint Ignatius of Antioch and Saint Ignatius of Loyola. That is not relevant. other than to say, I'm going to talk about St. Ignatius of Loyola, and it's important to know which Ignatius you're talking about. It's like Herod. There's more than one Herod in the Bible, and one of the first sermons I preached, here I was talking about Herod, and at the end of the service, I think it was the second sermon I'd ever preached, and the vicar of the church came to me and said, well, it was all very good, but you made a schoolboy error. I said, what was that? He said, there are two Herods, and you got them confused. I didn't know that there were two Herods. I'm still not quite sure which Herod comes when, but at least I know now to check which Herod. And so Ignatius, it's the same, Ignatius of Loyola. This is an old saint of the church, and he has something which is called the Examen. I'm going to give you, if you would like, a little piece of paper that says this on it, but I'm only going to give it to people who want it. Because we're trying not to just print hundreds of things and give them out. So I've got them if you want them, and you can have one from me at the end. And so if we want to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, then we need to do something about it. We need to do something practical to help us. Because the way you become better at running is you practice. And you practice different kinds of running. You do the short, fast runs, which is about making you go faster. You do the long runs, that's about endurance, and there's more technical stuff. But that's the gist of it. You do different kinds of practice in order to get better at running. And if you don't practice enough, then you don't do as well. I ran a 10K on Monday. I got 49 minutes and 37 seconds. I didn't think that was too bad. And then I looked up my time last year, which was 47 minutes and 30 seconds. And then I looked up my time from the year before, and I was 44 minutes and 53. And so you can see that my lack of discipline in running has caused me to slow down. And I have every excuse under the sun as to why I don't do it enough. But then when I'm tested, I can see the answer. I know I need to run more. I need to practice running faster. And so it's true too with spiritual matters. If we want our mind to be transformed, it's no good me saying here, and I've said this before, we just need to read the Bible and pray. I mean, basically that's it. Basically, the outcome of most sermons are read the Bible, pray, and then go do it. That's really what we're saying. So I want to give you a tool, and it's not mine, it belongs to Ignatius of Loyola. And it's a 5-step, this sounds fun now, doesn't it? There's 5 steps to doing this, and they are, in the evening, at the end of the day, in case you don't know when the evening is, at the end of the day, the first thing to do is to sit down and be aware of God's presence. Be aware of God's presence in you, around you, in the space. Many of you will do this already. Be aware of God's presence and ask the Holy Spirit to be with you as you spend a few minutes praying. It only takes 5 minutes to do this. So there you are, you're sitting in your chair, you're not falling asleep, because then you can't do the next 5 steps. But you're there, calmly, ready, listening for God's presence. And then you review the day with gratitude. You give thanks for the day. You look back and give thanks for all the things that happened. Number 3 is you pay attention to your emotions. How did you feel in the day? Were there times when you were feeling really happy and positive, and were there other times that you found really hard? Fourthly, and then the question to ask is, what is God saying to you through those feelings? So you've seen the times when you're happy or sad, and you're thinking, what's God saying to me through that? Then maybe pick one thing in the day and pray for it. It could have been a positive thing to give thanks for, or it could have been something that you found hard. So pick something, an event or a feeling that was good or that was bad, and just pray for that one thing. It's keeping it really simple and quick. And then lastly, look towards tomorrow. Pray for the day ahead. That's the grown-up version. The kids' version is, which we do with our kids, and on the paper it's on the backside. So if you've got kids, grandkids, people you babysit for who don't mind you doing this, sit down at the end of the day and say, what made you happy today? What made you sad today? And then after everyone shared what made them happy and sad, to share a prayer along the lines of, thank you, God, that you're with us in our happy things and our sad things. So that is called, it sounds very fancy, the Daily Examen from St. Ignatius of Loyola. And you can take those away. And that is a practical thing that we can do. Why would we do that? Because it's about resetting. Have you ever had a problem with your computer?
My computer is a problem.
Anyone else had a problem? This person doesn't. You have a problem with your computer, and what do? You turn it off. There's a comedy that the BBC produced called The IT Crowd. And has anyone seen that? And they pick up the phone. And the first thing they say is, hello, IT. And the second thing they say is, have you tried turning it off and on again? And it is so true. But it's not just computers. I worked with trains, and often when trains would have a problem, they would call it a system reboot. But basically, they turned it off and on again. I've been sitting on a plane, and they've had some malfunction. And the captain says, we're just going to do a system reset, which means we're going to turn it off and on again. And so it's the same for us. We go to sleep at night so that we can turn ourselves off and on again. And before we turn ourselves off and on again, it's good to spend some time reviewing and spend some time with God doing this kind of thing, to reset ourselves and to make that part of our rhythm. Even if you only have 2 minutes, which is how long it takes to brush your teeth, if you've got one of those. I've got an electric toothbrush and it tells me. In fact, mine buzzes every 30 seconds. So if you've got that, you could do 4 steps, couldn't you? You could do 30 seconds of becoming aware of God's presence, and And I just suggest that because one of you tonight will do that and be like, this will transform your spiritual life, I hope. But it's finding these ways, isn't it? Because it's really hard in our modern life to do this. What's the opposite of this? The opposite of this, back to the Girl Guide cookies or the apples at the grocery store, the opposite to this is pretending. The opposite of this is pretending to have a different mind when really you don't. Anyone who drives a car knows what I mean by this. When, we might want to wave some fingers or hands at the driver that's just cut us up or not let us in. And we think because we're a Christian, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep it inside. What Paul is saying here in verse 2 is not, don't flip the bird. He's saying, go back one step and find a way so that you don't get to the point where you're having to resist from doing that. Does that make sense? So it's not about us going, we're just going to bottle it up and then get passive aggressive and get annoyed and go home and you driver, cut me off. That isn't being transformed by the renewing of our mind. That's pretending. What Paul is talking about here is be transformed so that you can see things as though they were God's will. We were talking in my life group this week about kind of the stuff people put on social media. And when you see the comments, I mean, it's really, if you want to get angry about something that you're even not angry about, the best thing to do is go on to the Vancouver Sun or the Province Facebook page or the Maple Ridge News or Times or whatever they call themselves, and then look at the comments and look at what people say. Because sometimes people use aliases, sometimes they just don't care and they use their own names. But there's this thing of when you're in front of a screen, it can be much easier for people to say what they think, whereas they might not say it to someone face to face. And what the world will teach is, okay, that isn't good. What you should do is bottle that up, and you shouldn't put the bad stuff on there. What the Bible is teaching, being transformed by the renewing of your mind, means how do we get to the place that we're not thinking that stuff? So it's not that we're having to modify our behavior to make sure that we're not saying bad stuff, hurtful stuff. It's how do we get to the point that we're not thinking about it in the first place? I think this is really hard. I think it's really hard. Anyone else? Thank you. I think it's really hard. It's really hard to do. Because, we're taught to, behave ourselves. We're taught to be polite in good company and all those kinds of things. And actually, I think what the Bible is saying here is don't just be polite in good company. Your mind is to be transformed so that, verse 2, you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. How do we do that? It's back to the basics of reading the Bible so we know what his will is, of spending time praying. And a great way to do this is to use something like the Examen at the end of the day. If you're a morning person, you could do this in the morning. Some people fall asleep at 9 o'clock and are up at 4 or 5 in the morning. I had a new thing today. I had some setting on my phone, and I must have turned it on. And so this morning, I could hear these birds, and they were getting louder and louder, and I assumed the children got some toy birds that were making a noise. And in the end, after about 5 minutes, I realized it was my phone pretending to be some birds to try and wake me up. It worked, and I made it in time for the 9 o'clock service. But so if you are a morning person, which I'm not, then it's okay to do this in the morning. It doesn't have to be at the end of the night when you're exhausted. Do it first thing. One of the things that we have going now every day at 9 o'clock is we have morning prayer in church. It probably isn't worth driving into from Wannock or wherever you are, but if you're coming by and it fits into your day, on a weekday or a Saturday, to drop in at 9 o'clock for 15 minutes of prayer. It's these kinds of things that begin to just help us, to give us tools. Because the reality is it's really hard. It's really hard. And the only way we can be transformed by the renewing of our mind is to want to. And as that happens, the whole of the rest of Romans 2, which is everyone playing their part in the body, but Romans 12, everyone playing the part in their body, and then the whole second section about love being in action, that will all come to fruition. 12 verse 9, love must be sincere. Love must be sincere. And so everything comes out of a place of our mind, of what we think, of what's going in. And you know the thing of if you have two plants and one of them you water and you feed and one of them you don't, which is the one that's going to grow? And it's said of us as people that there's our good side and our bad side. There's our God side and our human side. Which side do we want to feed? If we feed on the scriptures, if we feed on prayer, if we feed on worship, if we spend more time becoming aware of God's presence, then our mind and therefore our lives will be more and more transformed. And I realize this is hard stuff, this is complicated stuff, and if I wasn't about to play a song, I would be the first person going for prayer ministry. So I do encourage you to respond. Respond in singing, respond in prayer where you are. Read that whole passage. I could do an hour on this whole passage. But really, it all comes out of a place of going, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Fix your eyes on Christ.